Good morning. Happy cold June as it seems to be today. Welcome to our June Fireside chat. We've got an interesting one lined up today. We couldn't quite decide on a topic, so we've decided to pick a couple of topics and merge them together. So, but we're joined as always by my fantastic panel of experts from some of the customers that we work with. And today, look, we're going to be talking about. I think quite topical, but not only some of the challenges and opportunities that we're now seeing around this kind of continuous evolution of remote and hybrid work, but also I think combined with some of the new technical innovations that are coming, the announcements of these new AI powered PCs, in particular some of the quite controversial products that are coming around Microsoft's recall, which has been quite heavily dominated in the tech press over the last couple of weeks, which kind of raises questions around data privacy and compliance and safety and those kind of things. But I think also around the continual attack surface that we're seeing and the continual large numbers of breaches that we've seen. Right, so we've seen the Ticketmaster breach last week, week for last week. Of course, we've seen attacks on NHS, or actually to the point Aidan made, the supply chain that supplies the NHS, right, and some of the massive impacts around those things. So as part of that, we're going to be talking about the role in which technology has to play, us as IT and security professionals, and also the role of every employee and every person in really trying to keep our critical organizational data secure and safe. So hopefully we'll get through all that stuff today. Welcome, panel. Thank you, as always, for joining. I think hopefully everyone knows who you are now, and it's good to see your names on the screens. But we'll dive straight in, I think, because Microsoft announced a couple of weeks ago the Copilot+PC, which is really this next generation of chipsets, right, with the obviously powered by NVIDIA, ARM-based chips that are going to revolutionize the next version of Windows with this feature called recall, right, which is all about allowing the technology to take snapshots of everything that happens on a user's device, whether that's at home or whether that's in the workplace, and allow someone to be able to essentially rewind, right? So recall is all about going back in time. What were you doing at a particular point in time? Was that an email you were writing? Was that something you were surfing on the internet, etc. So, and it's raised lots of questions about privacy and safeguarding. So I'm going to open up to the floor and just kind of get your view on these things. Is this kind of a step too far? Is this just what we need? Is this kind of what AI should be doing for us? Who wants to kick us off?
I don't mind going. I suspect a large part of my workforce will think it's a step too far. And I think they'd have fair concerns around privacy. I suppose, probably a bit different from some of the other chaps on the call in that we do still issue devices to staff, and it's a company device used for company systems, more so to do with sort of IT security than a bunch of other reasons around why we do that. I think I could definitely see sort of segments of my device, my staff group sort of saying, no, this would not be something they would be happy with at all, and we'd have probably industrial relations conversations to have off the back of it. So, to be frank, I don't think it's something we'd be deploying, because I do think it would be a step too far.
Yeah, of course, the technology is only available on the very latest devices, right? I think Microsoft confirmed this week, that it's going to be optional. You can turn it on, turn it off. What's the what do we think are the major concerns? Is it that we don't trust Microsoft? Is it that we don't trust ourselves? Is it that we're concerned about what happens if that device gets compromised? What's our biggest concerns, do we think?
I think it's the latter one, isn't it? There's a massive upsurge in all manner of attacks, phishing attacks, and a variety of other ways of people trying to get into devices and networks. It's just another source of information that, if people get access to, would compromise a business or compromise an individual, especially with things potentially being stored in clear text.
So I think that was clarified this week, and I think you're right. There was a lot of. I was quite blown away by the announcement initially. Stuff will be kept in plain text. It will be run under local user context. And I think if you called it last week, they've rectified that. Bear in mind, we were talking about a product that wasn't actually released, so it's not released yet. So data is encrypted. It requires a hardware hash now to unlock it. It's going to require biometric unlock, so not passwords. You need to be using multi-factor, so I think that helps definitely with that approach. But I think you're right. The more of this information that we have available. And I guess, whether that's business sensitive data. So to me, the things that I think about from a consumer perspective, I think it's quite cool, actually. I forget everything. So it's going to certainly be great. But I think in the workplace, sometimes I might be looking at, our finance system, I might be looking at our CRM system, and those things are quite heavily protected. They're obviously protected against, as I can authorize, I can use those things, but I'm not storing information. We're talking about a product that's going to let me essentially rewind time and see exactly what was on screen at one point. And that to me is the concern, right? Is that if that gets compromised, it's not about the files and the data, because I actually, trust the fact that if something encrypted is encrypted, the files and the data that I use on a daily basis, they are protected. We use various different protections to govern and protect our data, access control and information protection and DLP and those kind of things. But actually, if I'm able to just rewind and see everything on my screen, is it that is the scare factor, in that it's not about document security anymore? If someone can see your timeline, they can see everything you were looking at on screen, both from a business perspective and also, potentially personal things that you don't want anyone to see.
But then, and I think this is a really important piece, though, because if I'm dealing with you, Rob, and your machine gets breached, and let's say we're having a Teams chat,
yeah,
I have no protections in any of this, right? I have no control. I have no say over what's happening at your endpoint. And I think there is a real concern for organizations. Aidan kind of mentioned it. That I have a concern. What all of a sudden I have on my machine is now immediately accessible to a wider organization as a group through the devices, Copilot, the information. The fact that it's encrypted is neither here nor there. If you breach my device as me, you now see all the information, the conversation I have with the CFO, the to your point, I looked at the CRM. I as a firm, we're an executive search firm. The information, we have gone to extraordinary lengths to protect our data. And here we are. Ta-da! You can now just have a look at what Ken was looking at 3 minutes ago. And I think this is, it's not just a step too far. It's undermined years and years and years of work. And unless they can work out a way, there's no way I'm letting this anywhere near my environment, but I can't stop it with you having it. Yeah. It's my concern. It's like, I don't want to have a conversation with you, Rob, if I know you've got this running on your machine. It just, how do you then protect the information, data, whatever it is, pictures, whatever you're looking at, it's just gone out the window. It's a bizarre product. And
you've kind of got the weakest link, haven't you? So I think no matter what you do, as you say in your organization, I expect every corporate organization that has devices that are capable of running the technology will turn it off, right? And that's the default we do. If we don't know something, we turn it off. I think there is definitely some merit value. When you talk about conversations of things, I think, a lot of the time we're on Teams calls or whatever, we're recording and transcribing calls, the video is stored, all of those things are available. If someone gets breached, right, and they've got access to your data, that's technically available, right? So this is just another thing. I think that the aspect of this is probably the concerning factor for organizations rather than personal to an extent, is that I think this is about everything that's on screen, right? It's literally like someone looking over your shoulder, recording everything you do. It's like having a CCTV camera behind your back. And I think that's the bit that scares a lot of people. I think we're going to see a lot more clarity, I guess, over the next few months. There was a load last week around actually, how data is encrypted, what happens if you've got, how do you stop third-party screen readers and malware basically pulling the same levels of data? I've already seen on or GitHub people releasing their own. It's inspired loads of new third-party products that are essentially attempting to do the same things. Right? I think it's a really interesting use of AI that I can see loads of benefits for, but in a workplace, it scares the bejesus out of me.
Well, I mean,
I'm just going to take you to task on this, Rob. I don't see any benefits. This is really hard. I don't get how this actually helps me. And short of, I appreciate what you said about the short-term memory and what you did with your machine, but I would almost put this out to all of us on this panel. How often do you go back and think, like, I've got a search history in my browser, right? I can use like Spotlight search on an Apple device. I can query devices if I want the information. I don't want that CCDV looking over my shoulder and making my endpoint something that if it's whether it's corporate, personal, whatever, a horrific breach of all privacy, security, and everything you've gone out of your way to lock down. It seems like a really backward step, and I don't see how it can be monetized. I don't see the value in it, and I just see threat in everything it does. It's a bizarre product.
I think it's a bit like when we talk about any use of AI, right? And I think we're at this weird cusp, aren't we, of the boundaries between AI for good from organizations like Microsoft that we should trust, right? We absolutely should trust around governance and privacy and those things, because all of us trust them every day to run our businesses on, right? And also the stuff that is just because you can do something doesn't mean you should. And I think when the internet came out, we were talking earlier on before the call, trying to guess each other's ages, right? But when the internet came out, there was the internet for all sorts of things that were never really relevant. But because you could, people did it. Everything went online. And I think we're at this cusp now, aren't we, with AI, where it's almost like, what can we make it do that we could never do before without necessarily thinking about, I'm not saying people don't think about the implications of them, but actually, what is that merit benefit, and do we read it? Your point about search history, absolutely valid. I do get times when I've got things open, I've been working on stuff, I haven't saved it, draft emails, websites, whatever I might use in private browsing. I use it a lot just so I don't want cookies and those kind of things showing up. Sometimes there is a case of I wish I could remember what I was doing, but it doesn't necessarily mean I need a stealth tool in the background to help me find it. So I think it's going to be really interesting over the next few months to see whether it just gets dropped. I've seen lots of things out about being dropped, but assuming it doesn't and it makes its way into the next iteration of Windows, I mean, it's probably already there in the next release, and it gets activated. What do we need to do? What are the things as IT leaders that we need to do to remove that lowest common denominator, right? Which is the endpoint that you don't control, as you say, Ken.
I mean, I suppose, and sorry, I was just chipping here. I mean, we've spent so much time controlling who's got access to our finance system, our HR system, our special category system. I mean, we've got an occupational health department, so we've got staff medical records because we have to hold them because they're safety critical staff. And suddenly it's just going to be screenshotted, and then suddenly it's exposed on a local endpoint, which is it's a business endpoint, so it's controlled. But I mean, we've spent so much time restricting access to special category data wherever we need to then suddenly go, oh great, so Alice, our chief medical officer, or Bob, our sort of finance department person, is suddenly going to have that information on the screen. It'll be screenshotted and held locally on that device. Yeah. I can't think of anything worse. I'm totally with Ken. I just think it's someone's invented it because they can, not because there's a valid business need for it. So, Alex.
Yeah, I think what it will do as well, and we touched on this when we go into the hybrid work conversation, but when we think, certainly we see a lot of bring your own devices now, particularly with contractors, and in fact, we do a lot of things like Windows 365 and those things to control where we need to. But I think what this potentially will do is completely reverse, right, the bring your own, because if there's going to be technology that can be enabled on an endpoint, unless you have a mechanism of controlling those things, and there is more information coming out about what it can and what it can't do and how you protect and those things. But if you assume an organization that doesn't have all those controls in place, the only way in which to stop that in your organization is going to be to remove the risk of bring your own devices and make sure, to your point, Aidan, that you've got devices that are, controlled by IT, where those features are absolutely disabled on the device. So there is no chance of that being used inside the organization. But that's a complete flip when we think about how hybrid work works. of empowering people to use their own devices and, work the way they want to work and those kind of things. Yeah, I think it's going to be a very interesting 6 months. Do you think they'll scrap it? Do you think it will get scrapped?
Probably. It will probably be launched because they've already gone so far. So there'll be all the marketing stuff that's already probably in place, and they'll obviously have to make tweaks based on recent outcome feedback. But I suspect in the next couple of releases, it will slowly be depreciated and probably just removed at some point, like most of the other features end up being removed. Because, as you say, it will kill. I mean, from our perspective, like Aidan, we deploy laptops to our employees.
Yeah.
And BYOD doesn't exist. The problem is all of our clients, and there is some carve out in contracts that states that the devices that we're communicating with on the external side do not have recall enabled. We cannot guarantee that the work that we're talking about or discussing or sharing will be on the end user's PC. And also about personal devices, I have a hard enough time trying to convince my parents to keep their device and not click on links that they shouldn't do. And now I do not need them or other family members or even friends of theirs to also be potentially exposed by this. And what happens if it is opt-in and people don't do it, another piece of malware could get on that machine that could activate it in the background. Even if it is encrypted, I guarantee you that will be cracked, and there'll be ways to get around, as you can already see people are making tools to do that.
Well, I think we go back to that point, I think, which is probably quite topical for the next part of the discussion is, it's all about user compromise, right? And as we know, most breaches happen through, phishing attacks, ransomware attacks, etc., are through people clicking on something they believe to be right, and they're getting more and more sophisticated. Those emails that we all talk about that we were chatting on before the call started, that they are getting more sophisticated because people are using tools like AI to help them spell. Right? It used to be really easy to spot those fake emails because they are becoming very convincing.
Yeah, but the problem you may have is that a lot of work goes into training our employees to do that. But if you've got a tool in the background that completely circumnavigates that, they might also lose interest in keeping up with their cybersecurity skills, because it doesn't matter what we tell them to do and what controls we put in place. If they're working with a client that has recall on their machine and doesn't even know about it, or a prospective new client in a country that doesn't have the same regulations that we may have, there's zero guarantee that we can confidently state that our data is not potentially compromised. So it have legal departments completely up in arms. And I suspect if the EU were investigating, I'd be very surprised if it's not an about turnaround by Microsoft at some point.
I think you get to the point, Alex, and I think you've nailed it. In that it's the suppliers, it's the clients, it's everything else. We're working with such sensitive information. We will get to the point where we won't provide any information to our client. It will you will be coming into our office. We will show you something on our screen, and you won't get anything other than something we print out and give you, because you're not the trust and the control over your data anymore that you've spent millions of pounds and years of effort to take out of that domain, that risk domain, and secure. And I think I don't know how anybody thought this was a good product. I just don't get it. It's like, I know you can say, oh, it's AI and it's all this pushing the boundaries piece, but anybody with an ounce of common sense would have looked at this and just gone, it undermines Microsoft. I mean, it really doesn't do them any favors. And it's so ill thought out that it's almost like somebody just jokingly said, oh, we should do this. And then somewhere went, and put it out to their Surface Pro. We use Surface Pros, for example. It's the Surface Pros. It's like, I don't want it. I mean, I just don't want it anywhere near my brain. And it's,
they need something.
And you say ill thought out, but somebody spent, I imagine a very large team spent time and effort thinking about this, developing this. I'm with you guys. I don't understand it. I don't get the need for it. But there must be some use cases they've determined that there are out there that we don't understand.
I think it's
and I imagine they're probably very consumer led, right? I would imagine, because I look at this from a business perspective and really struggle to find a business use case of where that would be useful.
I'd also actually just want to state that I think that because it's more of a consumer feature, it's actually got more press than it would have done if it was purely a tick box in the enterprise SKU of Windows 11, for example, because the tech press would have read about it and written about it, but it wouldn't have got the traction that it's got if it wasn't realistically aimed at consumers. And that's where the focus is. It's a new NPU chip that's looking for a purpose. And this is probably a proof of concept that shows, look how powerful it can be. And then they've gone, wow, this could potentially be a selling feature for consumers.
Because you talk about the privacy stuff, and it's like, just think out loud from the things you're saying. You think if you're on a call and you're recording the call, for example, right? So if you're on a Teams call and you're recording it, people know you're being recorded, right? If you're being recorded, there's a legal requirement to do that. If it's a voice call, there's a legal requirement to ensure that people know that call is being recorded. And I've seen nothing about this. What happens if you're on a Teams call and you've got recalls snapping away in the background? How do people even know that, right? So straight away, I think they're breaking every kind of rule, right? And of course, no one's really seen this in the flesh, right? This is all conceptualized at the moment, really very early demos and things. But I don't see how it can be released in a corporate world, at least. I mean, I think, to be honest, everywhere, if there's no indication when you're doing anything that involves other people that content is being potentially recorded, because it is. So yeah, interesting one. So I guess I guess time will tell on this one, but I think it's I think unanimous agreement that, oh my God, what is this all about? I think it's going to be very interesting to see the development of this over the next few months. I think it's due to ship next month on some of the newer devices. So it'll be very interesting to see what happens with that. I think, yeah. All right, let's move on and talk about an area I know that's been topical a few times, but we were talking in the chat before about this world of hybrid and everyone kind of working differently. This may impact those things, but let's talk about skills, right? So I think as we move into this new AI powered world of stuff, right, it's definitely changes to the skill sets that we need our people to have to maximize the use of it. I think as IT professionals, we're starting to see Gen AI in almost every admin console that we see. We know that Copilot, for example, is coming into the Microsoft 365 admin center. It's coming into the Azure portal. You've got security copilots. You've got Cisco releasing their AI assistants for all of their network infrastructure. How as we plan forward then with our own team developments and also what our employees need to know around tech, how does that shift now? What do we think that recipe looks like, Jazz, from a skill set? I know it's something that you've been quite passionate about.
Well, it's not simply about how do we adapt for the AI world and develop the skills we need for that world. It's a skills that we won't develop because of AI as well. A lot of the more monotonous, rudimentary tasks that people will do at the early part of their careers, we're not going to be doing those because AI will use AI to be more efficient in achieving those tasks. So we won't develop the skills to challenge and interrogate the outputs of the AI tools, firstly. So that is one thing every sector is going to need to address in some way or other, is how do we continue to develop that talent pool. But hybrid working's another thing that's thrown a spanner in the works on that front as well, because part of that early career for most people is learning by osmosis. And if you're sat at home in front of a screen, you're not shadowing those people. You're not understanding what's going on around your immediate vicinity. You're learning from textbooks, you're learning from videos, you're learning from an instruction manual, but you're not learning as we would have traditionally learned. I don't know the answer to how we're going to adapt for the AI world. some schools are starting to look at their curriculums and realizing traditional curriculums just don't work, and starting to adapt that and try and developing skills that are more creative led, more cognitive led, rather than learning those traditional subjects in some ways. But that's a part of the piece. But it's also understanding what is possible with the technologies and the AI that we have at our disposal, and how do we maximize the value of that, and how do we then sort of position the skills around that to deliver the services that AI is delivering. Because as much as it will replace some of the rudimentary tasks that many of us will have done, there will be things that skills and there will be skills that we'll need to develop to maximize the output of those AI outputs. So I don't know the answer.
It's quite a double whammy, as you say, isn't it? Because you're right. We used to work through other people. I learned, through all my career, I learned with. Aidan, I remember back in the days working with you, and in our previous organisations, we used to spend quite a lot of time in teamwork, working together, exchanging ideas, drawing things out, learning things. And I think that can happen over remote work, but you're definitely right. That is definitely different. We see it with new people we bring on, where we try and align them a mentor to work with. That's so much harder when that mentor is virtual. As you say about skilling as well, I think we see it a lot, right? We're embracing these tools, whether that's email summarization, meeting notes, or even artwork and those things. We're giving up a lot of those, I guess, fundamental skills to technology. I see, not so much my senior teams, but I do see people trying to almost spend as much time on a document or a PowerPoint presentation. I don't know if any of you have seen this, but actually trying to get AI to get it right rather than them getting it right is a really interesting dynamic.
But your point around technology, that's another interesting one. We assume these are going to be technology skills. They're not. The prompt engineering. That's not a technology skill set you're looking for there. And there'll be many other skills that will feed into the world, which will blur the lines between a technology team and what sort of traditionally would have sat outside.
Yeah, you're right. Project managers. I've seen it. We've got a team of project managers here that have just had Copilot licensing. They're now using Copilot in tools like Planner and stuff, right, to build project plans. And you think a lot of them have probably never built a project plan before. But it's a really interesting shift of how much trust we're putting in, I guess. And are we diluting our skill sets, or is there just a completely new skill set that everybody needs to learn? Because that's the world we're moving into.
I think it's not this one skill set. It's the ability to change and be agile in the way we approach the working world, because we're all going to continue to have to keep changing, aren't we? Now, there isn't going to be a path as such, because AI will continue to challenge what we do and make us change again.
Yeah.
I think, Rob, you touched on it earlier. You drew a parallel to some of the stuff that we're going through to the internet appearing. I actually think this is another transitional shift that is as impactful as the arrival of the internet. And if you look at what Internet 1.0 looked like, it doesn't look like anything like it does today. And if you think about how the entire planet, including third world countries and everything, has shifted because of access to the internet, how our lives, banks don't exist anymore in the way that we're used to. Just everything, your supermarket, the fact that you can walk into an Amazon Fresh and just pick stuff off a shelf and walk out with it, right? There is a whole raft of things that just changed. Retail, travel, you name it, it changed. And the AI piece here is that same revolution. And actually, I think markets are very flexible and accommodate it. The problem is who does it leave behind? We're probably ahead of the wave, so we'll survive. It's who's underneath it when it comes crashing down, because the people behind it will actually surf it into the shore again. And I think this is the piece that we've got to recognize. There's this kind of squished middle bit. I actually think there is elements where younger generations are probably better prepared for some of this than we give them credit for, because actually they're very, very flexible at adopting, whether you've got kids who use social media or any kind of tech in the way that, I watch my kids going to school and they don't have pens and paper, right? They're working with different touch screens and everything. And it's, how that and what they learn is still material and important, but how they get to the answers is different. I think the big push, and this is the first one we talk about, the hybrid one, is that whole, there is an element of isolation. And how do you accommodate individuals into a group environment that makes them feel engaged, part of it? And I question the learning. I think there's always a way you can learn, and that will adapt. But it's actually, if you are a 21, a 20-year-old stuck at home, can't afford to leave house, your mum's kitchen somewhere, and that's your space for 60 hours a week, whatever it is, whether it's A or whatever, you're isolated, and that's not healthy for anyone. And I just think that there's a piece where, this push of tech, hey, I can do this, you're working from home, something has to give somewhere along the line to kind of either you use the AI, but you're in a community environment. We focus very closely on this at Leithwaite. We have an associate, we have a graduate program. It's about bringing people together. We still do hybrid working. It's how to have that balance to make sure that people feel engaged. The technology supports them in that engagement, and at the same time, they're given the freedoms of self-management, outcome-led leadership, not presenteeism. It's about that whole holistic view, and that's really hard to manage. I mean, I don't think there's a right answer in any of it, but it's very challenging.
Yeah, I think you both made some really good points, and I think it is just it does just question. And again, we go back to the pace of change, don't we? I think you're right. My kids aren't phased by, my kids are 8 and 6. They're not phased by anything new. They're not phased. You could, we go on a train trip, as I do with my kids at the weekend. They use AI to plan the trip, to tell me some things about this, tell me some stuff on the way. They've become actually really good little prompt engineers, because they just embrace it. It's just that continual pace of what they do. I think for us, and certainly a lot of my friends that don't work in tech roles, are still really blasé actually about those aspects. I've got friends that work in lots of different sectors, and when we have a few beers and we have a conversation about AI, which we do sometimes. A lot of them are quite, I think, blasé about it won't impact their role. And I think there is definitely that wave that is still coming as it matures, as the adoption of it matures over the next few months or years for organizations as well, as to how do we prepare those people for the change that's coming, and how do we define actually what their role is, what are they going to do? And I think that's probably the scary part, and why there's lots of resistance as well, is that kids and school children and younger generations just embrace that everything is different. Whereas I do a lot of work with public sector, right, where some people have been in their roles for 20-30 years and the role has never changed, and you think there are big changes coming to them, and we still need to take them on that journey without scaring people, right, that their jobs are going to go. And it's a hard variation actually to balance the two different things, between learning the new technology and almost unlearning something that they've done for 20 or 30 years, which I guess is similar to that kind of internet generation of stuff about, if you told someone when the internet came out that there'd be no need for banks, people would look at you like you're crazy.
Yeah, I think we have to put it slightly in perspective in that didn't necessarily happen overnight. That took a number of years to get to where it is today. I think the other thing that holds it back is a lot of this stuff is behind a second paywall. So if you want that AI feature, cough up another $20 a month for however many users want to use it. So it's quite easy to go, actually, we don't need it, because you have to do a valid comparison about actually what you're going to get out of it. I think a lot of the people, certainly, all of the people that work in my team, can probably navigate around the various portals and get the job done quicker than having to prompt an AI to try and hope that it gets the answer first time. We're finding it's more about automation on our front, and automate the boring tasks. And if AI can help with that, fantastic. But certainly from what we've seen, we were tempted about the Copilot security stuff. It doesn't really seem to offer much beyond what the skills of our trained employees can actually deduce. Everything else that we've seen has been behind a second paywall. And I think a lot of us in this room, and maybe the people you work with, have got that knowledge about how to do that thing quicker than having to just ask the thing to try and hope to find it. new people coming into the industry, as you state, may be quicker and pick those things up. It might be a slower shift than it's going to happen tomorrow, but absolutely, I think you have to invest in your own staff on the training front and make sure they are aware of what's coming down the pike, and hope that they get interested. Otherwise, as you say, it's like going from Exchange on-prem to Exchange online and having those conversations with those Exchange engineers that were awesome at what they did and were a little bit hesitant because they like tinkering with the tin. And it's just a different transition of skills. So you can bring them along, but I might be wrong, but I don't think it's going to happen in the next 6 months. I think it'll be another year and a half, 2 years away before it gets to competent levels.
Yeah, I think we have to remember we are right at the very, to that point of Internet 1.0, right? We are, whilst that pace of innovation development is Internet was, right? If you look at the adoption curve of generative AI tools, we are still in the very early days. I think we are still very much in the experimental days, hence the conversation earlier. Just because you can do something doesn't mean you should. But I think that leads us probably nicely to sort of last 10 minutes onto that conversation of which I've kind of called human v technology, right? But I think in and this isn't really just about tech, it's everywhere, as you say, about, as we start that kind of shift between responsibility, trust, and agility between what we do as humans, right? So whether that is, manning the fires from a security perspective, whether that is, doing the research and doing the work, whether that's creating content, there is definitely that kind of alignment between the things that used to be done by humans on technology, and then gradually, as I say, we've seen tools develop, to assist us with those things. We're now at that kind of shift, aren't we, where there is an ask by, every technology vendor almost to trust the technology more, to trust the AI more, right? Hence your point, Alex, on things like Security Copilot, right? Lots of marketing around these kind of things. I can see for smaller organizations that don't have big IT teams, I can see adoption being a lot higher, right? Because they don't have those teams, they can now be safe. But there is definitely that kind of trust point, isn't there, between at what point, and it links back to skills, but at what point do we fear that factor, and at what point do we embrace it? And it's a really complicated thing to navigate, I think, as leaders of our own teams, and trying to stay ahead of what our competition are doing as well.
So Jazz, on a previous Fireside Chat, had referenced how do younger people learn some of this stuff, and you've just talked about trusting a system. And what happens is that I am in a relatively small organization. We have a relatively small security team, but there is, if you start putting your almost a blind faith in things like Copilot, etc., you don't train anybody up and nobody learns, you never then question what's going on. So you don't know if actually you're only covering 30% of what you should be covering, versus because you don't know what you don't know. And there is no cutting of teeth. There is no making mistakes, failing. Phew, dodged a bullet there, didn't cost the firm millions of pounds. I won't do that again. I'm well aware. The AI is never going to learn this stuff. The AI is never going to, you are not going to know if you've actually been breached and you're just constantly being harvested for data because your AI is not telling you. This kind of sort of resilience and reliance on the AI is going to fix everything, and people are buying into that. I've seen it, and I question there is still an element where this is like the Internet 1.0. I saw lots of things start up, great ideas, fail miserably because actually they couldn't be monetized, or actually it was a massive security piece, or whatever it was. This AI journey that we're on at the moment is that finding your feet. I liken it to the growth of a kid. AI's appeared, it was born, it was like a cute little toddler. It's now kind of sort of grumpy 5-year-old. And actually what happens is when it gets to being a teenager, it will change markedly. And you'll have an interesting journey up until teenage years with the AI. And it's that runway. I don't know how long that runway is. The internet was a lot longer because it required hardware infrastructure, everything else like that. This is shorter. And it's whether or not you can, like, if I went to my partners and I said, well, look, I can save you a small fortune by not having people, we'll just put Copilot security in, we don't need a CISO anymore, ta-da, they'd probably bite my arm off. But I also know that we would probably go bust in 2 years' time because we'd have a massive security breach. It's like it's that balance between, no, you need the human skill set. And even when the AI comes in and it becomes that teenager and goes on to adulthood, it's going to need to be managed. And I think it's lost on people. It really is. And whilst it will be transformative, it's just the roles change. You still need the human aspect, and you just do things better and more. Regulation hasn't caught up. I'm obviously
totally agree.
That's insane. I mean, we are caught up with how data usage. I'm not going to name the company or the product, but I was looking through their T's and C's about something about their AI. They owned all the data that went into it. So if my firm started using it for something, search, the data that would have gone into it would have been theirs. And it's like, that's insane. And again, people don't understand what they're exposing themselves to, how actually we don't need a security breach. You're just going to give it to someone anyway. Giving
it to them. Yeah. And that goes back to that middle layer, doesn't it? Again, you're worry about protecting ourselves, but actually, sometimes the biggest risk are the people that own the data, right? And so the same, we were looking at a product, again, I won't name them, that have their own AI engine, exactly the same T's and C's in the small print, about who owns. It's their intellectual property. It's like, how can it be their intellectual property? It's our data.
Yeah.
So again, you really, really have to read that. And I think that again goes back to that point of, do we trust technology too much? And I think,
but then that plays into that naivety.
We try not to. I mean, IT come across as being the people that said no, right? Which I think IT have done a really great job over the years of being the enabler of services, right? And it's a real fine line, isn't it, now, between opening those floodgates and having to work so much harder to protect everything that we built and everything that we own.
But that's the thing. We are the enablers, but we also understand the risks associated. End users don't necessarily understand the risks. And what we're trying to do now, or what we have to do now, is we have to try and get the risks across to them and make them think risk first. And that's the hardest thing. We have users that want to use all manner of AI tools because they think it's going to improve their job, and they don't stop to necessarily think about who's training the data, where's your data ultimately going to end up. So we say no, we are the blockers and we're suddenly the bad guys. But it's only because if something bad does happen, I know what's going to happen. We're the ones that get it in the neck for allowing this stuff to happen in the first place. So I would rather be the firewall in between and take the brunt of that, because we go through another year of, touch wood, not having a data breach, and that's all it matters at the end of the day.
And Alex, how do we educate? It's a really good point, right? We talk about where these things have evolved from educating around, the days of how to spot a phishing attack and those kind of, things. But we're going to a point now which is far beyond that, right? We're not just talking about educating users on the dangers of, clicking a link on an email. We're talking about, how we stop them, not just in work, but at home, and just using any tool that says AI on it, right? And not really thinking about the implications of the amounts of things that they are potentially sharing, the risks of, perhaps, recall, or even worse, right? A third party version of that product that doesn't have the safety and governance guideline protections that a giant like Microsoft might have. There'll be lots of other products out there that claim to do similar things that are going to cause huge risks to our protection. How do we educate users on this stuff?
We technology people end up becoming the subject matter experts. We want people to use technology at the end of the day. We can all see the benefits of it. And if my parents get exposed to a hack on recall, they won't want to use that anymore. And they will then bug me to work out how we go backwards 10 years to put something in place for them that means they're not exposed to that. So that affects everybody. So we become the subject matter experts, and we have to train the users. We have to work as an IT. Well, as IT, I believe we need to work more closely with InfoSec to ensure that we're working in tandem and side by side. We're fortunate to have a modern workplace champion that's now busier than ever because, and these tools are also.
You always say that. I think every time we talk about something new, they're always busier.
But the thing is, I think something like AI it's not just an enterprise thing. It's now also on the consumer side. And because it's on the consumer side, it does have more awareness by the general public. And so we have to try and remind them of, make sure you're updating your own personal iPhone because of this breach and that sort of stuff. So I think businesses have to see that, IT can only go so far, and you either need to extend IT and get that training element inside it, or you're going to, I wouldn't say fail, but it's going to be much harder because there's so many things that you have to be focused on. And we now have to think security/risk first, unfortunately.
Do you think that people see themselves now as the point of risk, right? It was always done. It's IT's job, right, to protect. But do you think there is a shift in mindset that people understand that they are probably the attack surface? Do you think that's?
I think people might know that, but I think
you are the attack surface, right? Forget your computer, forget your antivirus. You are the attack surface.
I think what we have to remind the owners of the business that ultimately it's their heads on the block if things go wrong. And I think once we now raise all the risks up to board level, and we make them sign off on what is acceptable or not. And it's the only way that we find that we can actually try and make strides forward and bring awareness to the business. If it's just a risk that IT own, then it's just another thing that you get that IT has to do. If you make it a business risk, I think you've got better chance of getting traction to actually try and fix it, or at least put some guardrails in place.
So it's quite interesting you bring that up. Just very kind of briefly, if you're ISO 27001, there is a very key component part of that, which is you actually have to, whether you're a smaller organization like myself or my firm, we have the founders as part of our ISMS sort of board, because they have to be aware of the risk. And it's funny, it's not you don't get into the tech, they don't need to know, they need to know about the risk that the firm is exposed to. And it's fascinating the number of organizations where you meet, let's say they're ISO 27001, and the leadership do, as Alex points out, wash their hands of it. It's a tech problem. No. It's an everybody problem. Yeah. Very much a leadership problem as well. You need to be very aware of that. I think just build off of what Alex has said there, and you saying about the individuals being the attack surface. I think they've always been. What I think we currently have is a real sort of challenge between super tightening of regulation, the free availability of data and information, and actually it's, people talk about the infamous red tape, and I don't just mean in the UK, I mean anywhere. You get to this point where people are going, well, this is computers saying no is fundamentally stopping me from doing my job, or it's doing this. And actually there are a lot of barriers to completing work now, because we've used all of these wonderful tools that actually, if used maliciously, become an absolute nightmare. And I think one of the roles of technologists going forward is not just getting technology into the workplace, it's also helping the user who knows that they're attack surface, but they want to work. And we've got to try and find a way of getting that marriage of practical safeties, regulatory compliance, and at the same time, the entrepreneurial sort of delivery of work. And it's never been more complicated than it is at the moment. And AI is just another spanner in the works to make that even more challenging. And I don't think there's an answer for it. That's the problem. I think us technology leaders kind of have that issue of trying to navigate that really complex maze. And I'm not even sure whether that statement can be finished.
Yeah, no, you're right. And I think Alex made that point as well about, you have to kind of be the gatekeepers and things as well. But you're right. We're also battling against the fact that there's so many freely available tools out there as well. It's about giving them access to the right technology so they don't go and find a way to use the technology that they shouldn't be using. I was with a client a couple of weeks back, and they're like, "Oh no, we blocked all AI." And it's like, "Well, how have you done that?" Well, we just blocked it. We blocked, a bunch of common sites. People can't use it. If they want to do it, they can go and do it on their home. And it's only when you get them to dive into the logs and the alleys. There are so many tools out there that people are using without really realizing it. Some of them are just cropping up in tools that they didn't even know were there. They were tools that never had AI, and now the latest update has brought it in. And those same things about the T's and C's. And, I could sit and name a number of products that we use internally that have suddenly got AI in them. And you look at the data, and it's like you are putting your own data into something and having no idea where it's going. And that's what's really scary, I think, when we think about that. And it's not because we're doing it maliciously. We're doing it, to your point, to trying to work more effectively, work faster. We don't have to hire new people, whatever that might be. But we don't realize, back to that point, we all know we should look at a link before we click it, but we are we have this world where people are encouraged to share information without really knowing where it's going.
Can I just add on that, Rob? It's not just where it's going, it's then how it is subsequently used elsewhere. Because that's what people forget what an LLM does, is you teach it and then it's used, your information goes in and comes out at another client's. So like, let's say, for example, we're recording a meeting and we discuss salaries, and that ends up being transcribed into some system somewhere that we don't own. Then somebody in an AI engine using that same LLM goes, how much does a CIO earn? And that information that we shared through there goes out, and we have no idea where that's used. And that's the other part. It's not just the fact that you've given it away, it gets used. And that's really scary.
And that's a good point, isn't it? Because to the user, they don't necessarily differentiate between the differences of the tools they're using, even just between using, let's take ChatGPT as its core, using the standard free consumer version, which doesn't have any of that kind of data protection stuff in it. They're quite open about the fact that they will use any data to train their models, versus the premium versions of those things that offer that corporate data protection, where you get that kind of clarity that the data is not used to train models. But to an end user, that's way above the head, isn't it? It's just a service that's available in a tool. There's often a free version and a paid version. That stuff's not commonly known.
But that's back to the understanding of the user, though, because at the end of the day, why have IT said no? Yes, the computer has said no, but it said no for a reason. And it's the data governance in the T's and C's they haven't read and won't ever read, to be frank.
Yeah.
So it's the education piece from sort of IT and the business to say, no, these are the reasons why we're blocking you from using these things. Don't go then use the free version at home or on a different device or whatever else, because as Ken said and as others have said on the call, once the data goes in, the T's and C's say it's theirs to sort of come out anywhere else.
Yeah,
and that's
it is all
about the education piece, really.
Absolutely, it's all about the education. It's got to start somewhere, though. Just a bit left field, but my son's school tonight has got a webinar for all parents to introduce AI and how the school's going to use AI and how it'll impact the kids there.
Amazing.
Yeah, but that thing's going to become more and more. Yeah, I'm going to join. I hope you learn something.
Love it. I'd love to hear what they tell. I think that's a really, really great thing they're doing, actually. I've been asked to take part in one in a couple of weeks at my kids' school, actually, about how it's transforming different roles. They've got a number of different people coming in, talking about their different jobs and how they're using AI to the school. So I'm going along to that, actually. But I'd love to hear what they tell you. That's awesome that they're doing it.
Are you going to be that person, Jazz, and ask all the hard questions around data security?
Don't worry, Aidan, I'll take all your questions. they are doing a Q&A at the end, so they've opened themselves up to it.
Oh, that's going to be interesting. I think if it was my kids' school, it would definitely be helping them do PowerPoint every year when they do their kind of end of year presentations and awards for the class that parents get invited to go to. We always get. I won't even mention the role of the person in case it leaks. But the first thing
you're amongst friends here,
the first thing they said for the last 5 years that I've been going along is, now I'm not very good at using PowerPoint, so bear with me. And that's how it always starts. And you think, like, you've been saying that for 5 years. Like, just learn it over the summer holidays. It's not that hard.
I generally choose most meetings like that.
Jazz, you can ask them if they've ask their IT if they've blocked the group policy to roll out recall. And then the next question is, well, when they ask you what group policy is, then you can say, well, here's my fee for coming in and giving you a bit of a tutorial.
Okay.
It's when they answer those questions, Aidan, and then ask me something, Alex, sorry, and they ask me something more complicated. I'm going to struggle.
I'm really intrigued to know how that goes. That's brilliant. Do you know what? That's probably a brilliant place to end. Actually, it's been. I've really enjoyed today. Thank you, everyone. It's been really interesting conversation. I think it'd definitely be good to see where what happens with recall. Maybe we should do a little poll on whether it gets canned. Or certainly gets canned from enterprise SKUs. Anyway, really good. Education stuff I love. I love that, Jazz, that your kids' school are doing that. I think that's really bold, actually. I think it's a really great thing to be doing. At least they're addressing it and surfacing it and making parents aware of it. And I think on the flip side of the educational piece, I think let's keep in touch on this. Right? I think it's really interesting. We're going through what we do around our necks, even like employee onboarding and those kind of things and how that's shifting. We're looking at putting a lot of our starter guides and training and awareness and stuff, and we're looking at putting some AI behind that, right, to help people find the information they need rather than bombarding them with stuff. So it's a really interesting model of how we take that shift between self-service from when people start. We have a lot of people that start in our company and probably never come to the office and don't have a lot of that face-to-face time. So I think there's definitely a lot of work to be done around, the way in which people work, outside of AI, just generally how people learn, how they interface. We're looking at building a new grad program internally, and that's going to be very heavily centered around, physical mentoring, right? I think the only way to develop a lot of people is to build that in and ensure that people get face time with each other. So it's going to be really interesting to see how we all develop. But thank you as always. Great conversations. Hope you enjoyed it as much as I did. Thank you. We'll see you on the next show. Thank you.
Sure.